The air of the ancient world felt heavy. It was a time of great change. The Roman Empire, which had for centuries been the most powerful civilization on earth, was fading from the pages of history like a slowly dying star whose light stretched across time. The empire, vast and far-reaching, covered regions from the cool northern forests of Britain to the desert sands of Egypt. As we begin, let us imagine the Roman Empire, its roads stretching out from the bustling city of Rome like veins of a great living organism, its armies marching in unison, its legions victorious. But like all things, it was slowly crumbling. The empire was too vast, too complex to hold together forever. Tribes from the north, Goths, Vandals, and Huns had begun to push on the borders, disrupting the empire's once unified structure. In the year 476 AD, the fall of the Western Roman Empire was a quiet whisper. It came not with a great crash, but with the soft, inevitable decline of what had once been the center of the known world. The last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was dethroned by a barbarian king, Odoacer. This moment marked the end of the Roman Empire in the West. But the fall of Rome did not mean the end of Rome entirely. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to carry the weight of Roman tradition for many centuries more. In fact, the fall of Rome marked only the beginning of something new, the medieval world. And so, as the remnants of Rome crumbled, Europe fell into a period of disarray. This time, often called the Dark Ages, was marked by scattered kingdoms, chaos, and the disappearance of once grand Roman institutions. The lands that had been ruled by Romans were now filled with people trying to forge a new world. The first centuries after the fall of Rome were marked by a return to smaller, decentralized kingdoms. The Anglo-Saxons, after having migrated from the continent to Britain, established their own kingdoms, such as Wessex and Mercia. To the south, the Franks, a Germanic tribe, began to assert their dominance over what is now France. One of the most transformative elements of the early medieval world was the rise of Christianity. After Clovis, the king of the Franks, converted to Christianity in 496 AD, a pattern began to emerge. Many other rulers in Europe followed suit, making Christianity the dominant religion. Churches and monasteries became not only centers of worship, but of education and administration as well. Monks in remote monasteries, far from the world's distractions, preserved the writings of ancient philosophers and scholars. They copied manuscripts, both pagan and Christian, by hand, ensuring that the knowledge of the ancient world did not vanish. It was in these quiet, humble spaces that the spark of learning would be nurtured and eventually spread again. Across Europe, the church had slowly begun to grow in power. The Pope in Rome would become the spiritual leader of all of Christendom, and the influence of the church extended far beyond religion. It began to offer stability in a time when political authority was fragmented. Bishops and abbots wielded great influence over lands and people, and the church itself became an institution that ruled with a steady, unyielding hand. The 8th century saw a figure rise above the tumult of the Dark Ages, Charlemagne. A king of the Franks, he sought to unite much of Western Europe under one crown, reviving the concept of a united empire, something that had not existed since the fall of Rome. In 800 AD, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III, establishing the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne expanded his kingdom through both warfare and diplomacy, bringing together the various fractured kingdoms of Europe under one banner. His reign marked a brief yet significant cultural revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance. He promoted the arts, learning, and architecture. His empire saw the creation of beautiful illuminated manuscripts and a renewed interest in the classics. The idea of the Holy Roman Empire would live on, influencing future rulers. Though Charlemagne's empire would not last long after his death, his legacy was profound. He had set the stage for a vision of Europe as one Christian, united entity, even if the empire would later fragment into smaller kingdoms. His reign showed that even in a fractured world, a single vision could bring forth a brief flowering of culture and power. Beyond the lands of Charlemagne's empire, in the far northern reaches of Europe, a different kind of empire was beginning to emerge. The Viking Age began in the late 8th century when these seafaring Norsemen started to raid the coasts of Britain, Ireland, and the European continent. Their long ships, capable of swift travel, allowed them to strike and disappear before their enemies could retaliate. The Viking raids were sudden and brutal. Villages were burned, monasteries plundered, and towns left in ruins. The first recorded Viking raid occurred in 793 AD when they attacked the monastery at Lindisfarne on the northeastern coast of England. This raid, with its shock and terror, marked the beginning of a period of Viking invasions across Europe. Though they were known for their raids, the Vikings were also settlers. Over time, they established settlements in the lands they had once attacked. They founded the Danelaw in England and settled in parts of Ireland and France. In fact, the region of Normandy in northern France was settled by Vikings, eventually becoming one of the most powerful duchies in Europe. The Vikings were not just invaders, but explorers, traders, and settlers. They crossed the North Atlantic, reaching Greenland and even North America. Their sagas, stories of their gods, heroes, and adventures became legendary. Their influence remains in the modern world, particularly in areas where they settled, such as Normandy, where they would later play a key role in the conquest of England. The Viking Age eventually faded, but Europe continued to evolve. By the 10th and 11th centuries, a new system of society began to take hold: feudalism. The feudal system was built on the idea of land as the central source of wealth and power. Kings granted vast tracts of land to nobles, who in turn offered protection and land to knights. Feudalism divided society into distinct classes: the king at the top, followed by lords, knights, and peasants. The knights sworn to their lords were the warrior class. In exchange for land, they protected the realm from invaders and participated in military campaigns. Castles, with their towering walls and watchful towers, became symbols of this system, offering both protection and authority. The church continued to grow in influence during this period, providing stability and spiritual guidance. Bishops and abbots controlled vast estates, and the Pope had significant sway over kings. Religious authority was at the heart of European life, and the church's teachings shaped the laws and norms of the time. The knights, bound by the ideals of chivalry, were expected to live by a strict moral code. This code emphasized bravery, honor, and respect for women. The idealized image of the knight in shining armor, riding off to battle with sword in hand, became the defining symbol of medieval Europe. Though many knights were often motivated by self-interest and ambition, the concept of chivalry lingered throughout the medieval period. The 11th century brought about a new chapter in the history of Europe, the Crusades. Pope Urban II, in 1095, called upon the knights of Christendom to reclaim Jerusalem from the Muslims. This call to arms would set off a series of religious wars, known as the Crusades, which spanned nearly 200 years. Thousands of knights and peasants heeded the Pope's call, traveling to the Holy Land with the promise of salvation. The Crusaders, united in their faith and their desire for glory, set out on a long and arduous journey. After months of travel, they captured Jerusalem in 1099, slaughtering many of its inhabitants in the process. Though the Crusaders were unable to hold Jerusalem permanently, the Crusades left a lasting impact. Trade between East and West flourished as Europeans encountered the advanced cultures of the Muslim world. New ideas in mathematics, science, and medicine found their way back to Europe, marking the beginning of a period of intellectual rediscovery. One of the most legendary and mysterious aspects of the Crusades was the rise of the Knights Templar. Originally founded to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, they grew powerful and wealthy, eventually controlling vast estates. Their sudden disappearance after the Crusades left behind countless myths and legends, many of which still capture the imagination today. As the 14th century progressed, Europe was struck by a catastrophic event, the Black Death. This horrific plague, carried by fleas on rats, swept across the continent with terrifying speed. It is estimated that between 25 and 50% of Europe's population died within a few years. The Black Death arrived in Europe in 1347, carried by ships that had been trading along the Silk Road. It spread quickly, decimating entire towns and cities. No one was immune, rich or poor, young or old. Entire families perished in the blink of an eye. The Black Death had far-reaching effects. The social order was upended, and the economy was crippled. But in the wake of devastation, there were changes. With so many people dead, the survivors found that they could demand better wages. In the feudal system, already under strain, began to collapse. The power of the church also began to wane as many people questioned their faith after such a merciless plague. Out of the darkness of the Black Death came the first stirrings of the Renaissance. New ideas about art, science, and humanism began to take root. This intellectual revival, centered in Italy, would eventually give birth to some of the greatest works of art and thought the world had ever known. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo would lay the foundation for the modern world. And so the medieval age, with all its trials and triumphs, slowly faded into history. The knights, the castles, the church, all became part of a bygone era. Yet the legacies of the Middle Ages would endure in the very fabric of the modern world. The Renaissance, the rise of the nation-state, and the development of modern philosophy and science all had their roots in the soil of medieval Europe. Thus, as we close our journey through the Middle Ages, we are reminded that history, though quiet and slow in its progress, is like a river, ever flowing, carrying with it the memories of ages past, shaping the world we live in today.